Hello and welcome to the Pirates Fan Forum here on DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I'm your host, Gary Morgan. With me, as always, my good friend, Jim Stam. How you doing, brother?
Aside from some seasonal allergies, I'm all right. I don't know. Maybe I'm like the Pirates. I'm just allergic to postseason baseball, and my body can't take it, Gary. I don't know. So excuse me and everybody listening if I snort and sniffle. Bear with me tonight.
Yeah, it'll be okay because I'm going to talk a lot, and that usually ends up drowning it out. We're going to talk about the playoffs tonight. It's been fun. The rule changes are fully in effect. I think we've had teams have ample time to adjust to the expectations of the playoffs now and the way this format works and all the ins and outs of what happens if you do earn the 5 days off to sit around and wait for to find out what your matchup is versus just squeaking in and riding momentum into the playoffs and seeing what that does to a team. I want to talk about all the different angles of what that has created now. What kind of teams are we actually seeing put together? Are people trying to build World Series victors, or are they trying to build teams that get in, Jim? That's really the point of what I want to talk about today. And we also want to talk about how these teams were built, these ones in particular.
Yeah, and how it relates to the Pirates, and what do we think of the setup in general, and numbers of teams that get in. So yeah, I mean, I think we're going to have a good talk today on this stuff.
Let's see. Mac here says, we need to force the owner to seek the team. I think you mean sell, probably. Accepting mediocre players, coaches' performances hasn't and never will be acceptable. Sure, Mark. I mean, how about it? I don't know what you want me to do to force him. I mean, I ran into him once, I think, on Federal Street. I don't think he's going to listen to me. Sorry. Playoffs are rolling, though, right now, man. Like Detroit and Cleveland are locked in a battle. Detroit just came back like late in the game to like tie it up. It's fun atmosphere for those people in Detroit that have not seen playoff baseball in quite some time. And Jim, I think maybe that's the thing that some of these small market teams need to experience a little bit more, is what having just a taste of playoff baseball can do for your city. Maybe in that way, all these rule changes and letting some teams that maybe don't have super teams put together sneak in, maybe it gives them incentive to maybe put a little bit more into their teams. Then, maybe they'll take it the opposite of what you and I think they will.
Yeah, to me, it's a little bit of a catch-22, Gary, just simply because, look, we're talking 12 now of 30 teams. It's 40% of the teams now are getting into the MLB postseason. So, that's a unprecedented number in Major League Baseball. And I'm quite sure the owners collectively love the money that generates, the extra games, the ratings, the everything. And yes, we've seen some good postseason, some really good postseason. And yes, it does give teams a chance to get in that might not be able to compete financially with the big boys. And it could probably influence some of those smaller teams to want to compete more. But overall, does it spread that far, or is there a cancellation of that versus a lot of teams now are just setting their sights on, well, I think we can spend enough and get in. So
yeah, because doesn't it in a way seem a lot more likely that the teams that are actually funding a lot of these teams that don't want to spend money through revenue sharing. Doesn't it seem like at some point they'll kind of get tired of losing and not getting the ultimate prize? And why are we paying so much more to end up in the same place?
It, yeah, that's part of it, right? Because you've got, I mean,
Like, will they cap themselves? Is what I'm asking.
yeah, they've almost made like a little deal with the devil, which is money, right? Like there's extra money to be made here, and you've thrown a bone to some of the smaller market teams, but the randomness of baseball, it's left.
Once you get into the dance, anyway, you have to build a team that's reasonably good.
That can get there.
It's not like you're going to get in with just absolute garbage. But let's be really honest about Detroit, for instance.
Right.
They're hot as hell right now. I mean, they came into it hot. They played hot that entire last month. I look at that team on paper and really what they did most of this year and what they have coming back and how they're set up. I don't think they're even going to make it back to the playoffs next year. Good for them. They're in it. Don't get me wrong. I'm rooting for them. I mean, yeah. I'd love for them to win the whole thing. But I'm watching and I'm just thinking to myself, they didn't really get here purposefully, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. You look at them and you're kind of like, how did they do this? Right. Like,
yeah,
they weren't even at the trade deadline. They were already thinking about next year, and
they sold.
Yes. It just seemed to, it's a really, really curious case. I think, Gary, too, like this is what gets me is like, I just want to be an ignorant fan and watch this postseason and be able to root for the Tigers, right? I want to be able to root for teams like that. But then I worry, and I've talked about this before, where does this almost like reinforce to some teams here in Pittsburgh that, well, maybe we can be the Tigers. Maybe we can just do that and
I think
get
there's
in.
Some wisdom there, Jim. I mean, like, how much did we watch them go out of their way to praise the Diamondbacks last year? Specifically the Diamondbacks. That was the team that they kept hammering. Yeah, they're a similar media market and all that. Yeah. But they've built through the draft and trade, and they've got a young core. And they only won 84 games and made it all the way to the World Series. I think there's a reason the Pirates spent so much time praising the Arizona Diamondbacks, Jim. And I think it's because that's the type of compete they're talking about when they say compete. And I guess what I'm saying is, looking at this roster right now, we're thinking like, man, they're so far away from being a World Series contender. Because we're thinking World Series contender like Dodgers. I guess the way the Mets are playing right now, although I never saw them as a World Series contender all season. I thought the Braves were better. Phillies, they're out already. Those are the types of teams that I think people thought were World Series contenders. I think what I'm learning watching the playoffs is you get in, you're a World Series contender. It doesn't matter. Then I think it's hard to imagine that if a team like the Pirates doesn't see that as more of the goal. Yeah, obviously you want to win the World Series, but getting into the dance is a measurable goal. You can shoot for building a team that can get into that more often, no matter how much you spend, really.
Definitely. I think a lot of teams are starting to approach it that way, where, you try to build a team where you're not having to fully go in financially all the way in, and you hope to stay healthy, and you've got 3 extra wild card spots now. So there's a lot of ways where you can kind of, maybe weasel your way in. And you don't necessarily have to be the guys that spend $250 million on payroll. You have to have an idea of what you're doing and be able to execute it. But I think everyone talks themselves into that they're the next team that's going to be able to do that.
Yeah. Hey, let's take a quick break, come back, and let's pick up where we left off.
Sure.
At DK Pittsburgh Sports, we take pride in coverage that connects our city's fans to their favorite teams. Now, that connection's stronger than ever. Introducing our all-new state-of-the-art app. Find expert inside reporting and original podcasts. Check live box scores. Track the latest stats. Chat it up with our community of thousands of fans, all in one place. The new app from DK Pittsburgh Sports. Coverage that connects.
All right, welcome back to the Pirates Fan Forum here on DK Pittsburgh Sports. Let's see, Mark's with us here again. Also,
Mac.
we're positive. Oh, Mac, I'm sorry. Jeez, why did I read that as Mark? I'm sorry. The content used to be someone who hated baseball, but this show and others have made me realize baseball can be fun. It isn't always slow as I thought it was. Well, good. I'm glad the playoffs are trying to prove you wrong because the pitch clock seems to have disappeared. These games are going on and on and on and on.
Well, when you use 65 pitchers, that's probably going to happen.
There's Canyon. I think he's one of the people that was protesting down on Grant Street. So some of you, like Mac, I think you were saying in the chat earlier, you want someone to organize. There's someone who is. Bridge to Bucktober. Josh is here. Let's go. His show goes live at 9:30 tonight. So
yeah,
Thursdays are a fun night for baseball broadcasts. So Jim, I think purists like us, or should I say old people, we grew up with like, you played all season long, you won the pennant in the East, you won the pennant in the West, you went and played the playoffs for a chance to go to the World Series, right?
Yep.
And then they introduced, an extra division and then a wild card. And then, it's progressed over the years. And I think it's made us uncomfortable as fans, right?
Yeah.
But that's why when we see a team, we look at it right away and we go, that's not a World Series team. Because we're picturing a team that's going to win 95 to 100 in some games, be the top of their division, get that bye, be the perennial favorite the entire way through the World Series. It just don't happen. Look at how often the Dodgers win. But maybe it's not as drastic as we think, because I love the other sports, right? The NFL, 14 of 32 teams make the playoffs. The NHL, a full 16 of 32, half.
Yeah.
Half the teams make the playoffs. So when your team doesn't make the playoffs in the NHL, you legit stink. You know what I mean?
Gary, we know the last 2 years here.
I'm reminding people here because it's very unusual in Pittsburgh for hockey.
Right.
So maybe you miss out on how many teams actually make it in. The NBA, 16 of 30 teams. MLB has 12 of 30. So, that's not really outlandish, but it really feels like it's made a big difference, right? I mean, it made the races interesting all year, which I think was part of the intended consequences, right? We definitely wanted to have that happen. We definitely wanted to feel a little bit more parity, right? They wanted parity. That's what they were shooting for. I think this playoff, so far at least, it looks like parity's on the table. But it might be fake parity, right? It might be the type of parity that, like, for instance, has a frustrated fan base fight through all year thinking their team either stinks or might be close to good enough for an 84-win season that sneaks you into the playoffs, and potentially you do something amazing from there on out. I don't know that that's going to feel the same as a Dodger fan waking up on April 15th knowing they have a team that's going to be in the playoffs. And that first loss in March doesn't matter much because, they're going to win 100. It doesn't matter, 98, whatever. I don't know that they're cultivating the kind of feeling they think they are. I think they think they're developing this wide open parity, but I think a lot of us are a little smarter than that.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a randomness to baseball that I don't think applies maybe to the other sports as much. Just by nature, we've talked about this before, you're essentially trying to win 5 or 6 out of every 10 games, right? So it's a slow grind to even be 560 winning percentage, 580 winning percentage, something like that. And then you get in the playoffs, and then things like starting pitcher or a team goes in a slump, those things tend to play out a little bit more in those types of games. You got the weather changes. So I think
Yeah.
in baseball, there's a little bit more like factors that go into why it's such a roll of the dice. And does that make any games important during the regular season? I suppose when we get down to the last couple weeks, sure. But it kind of it guarantees big boys spots, but then it kind of jeopardizes those spots once they get in. You know,
Yeah, like
it's a weird mix.
I think in baseball, of all the sports, I think in football to a degree too, Jim. I hate the bye in the playoffs. I don't see it as a benefit most of the time. In the NFL, I guess it is because you rest up, and you always need rest and you always need to try to get guys healthy. But they also get rusty. And that first quarter of the Super Bowl is always a little fishy, right? For both teams. And that first couple series for that team that got the bye is always a little shaky. Well, the Phillies really, really suffered, I think, from sitting for 5 days. On top of they weren't playing well going into the playoffs. So they had to sit there and stew on not playing well for a few weeks, for 5 days, watching these other teams energetically go after it. And then they just got boat raced by a team that had inertia at their back.
Yeah, you could lose a little bit of that edge. I do think like the one area it really helps you, I think, is like your bullpen, right? Like you can get your bullpen like fully rested because your bullpen you've probably used a lot to get to where you've gotten. And then your bullpen arms, they probably could use that 3, 4, 5 days off. It's the hitting side of things where I think it really messes with teams usually.
Here's Yark. He says they should make a bigger deal out of most regular season wins in each league, regular season trophy bonus to players, no matter how many teams, so much luck involved in the playoffs. There's some logic there. The NHL's done the President's Trophy, but the President's Trophy has become almost a sign of bad luck in the NHL ever since '93, right? So
yeah, no one even wants to mess with it.
Like, Jim, I'm not saying like the goal is for teams to not win 100 games. I'm sure they'd love to. I'm just saying, like, if the difference from, say, 85 wins to 100 wins, or at least a team you think is capable of 85 wins versus 100 wins, is, say, 30 million, I think I know which side of that equation most of these low rent owners are going to pick. Right? So
yeah, because 30 million to them is 100 million.
right.
You know what I mean? Like for other teams that are willing to try to buy those extra 15 wins. So we talk about this too, Gary, as we talk about like what these teams, we talk about the Mets. Great, they're doing well. They really caught fire as the season went on, but they've got $300 million payroll, and they're sitting on a lot of dead money that they have just eaten to the likes of still paying Scherzer and a couple other guys. And it's
that's an important distinction, don't you think? Because we talk about payrolls and we talk about it like the blanket number. Like, oh, here's this number that they pay. Okay. Well, LA's is pretty misleading because of all the deferred money that Shohei Ohtani has, right? That's a $40 million player making $2. You know what I mean? So, I mean, and I know their CBA number is bigger than that, but like, I'm just saying, like, when we talk about like active payrolls, like people love to throw that. Here's active payroll. You have to realize too how playoff rosters happen. Like, if a starter's not going to go in a series, he probably doesn't make the playoff roster in that opening series. So all those numbers that were floating around for the opening series, like, look at how cheap their team is to be here. I mean, like, Detroit's even sitting on a bunch of dead money. if you really, really think about it. And their payroll is not much greater than the Pirates is. So I don't know, man.
Let me ask you this. Does this because here's the thing. We talk about like whether you want to implement the salary cap and the floor and whatever, and this is always where people point to that say baseball doesn't need it, right? Is that look at the postseason. There's a randomness to who wins it. The payroll doesn't really matter. The numbers say this. My argument to that would be, well, it helps you get there. Then it's a bit of a crapshoot, but it does usually buy you to get in. Aside from a few exceptions, is there any validity to when people say that? Do you think that, well, this is the reason they don't need it?
I think the misnomer about salary is that it's really buying you bites at the apple. Every time you get in the playoffs, it's a bite at the apple. And those teams that spend a lot of money are going to have a better chance of getting a bite at the apple every year. But it hasn't led to World Series for them most of the time. I mean, like, again, LA only won like in the COVID year.
Yeah.
And
despite being in the playoffs yearly.
Right. And look, the LA Angels had money too. Lots of it. They had Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani at one point. They never built around it. You still have to do smart things as a team. It's just the money itself. I think what it really gets you is room for error, because you can mess up and hold dead money. That's actually why most of these are so bloated to begin with. It's not actually what they're paying. It's the guys they're not paying, or the guys they're paying that aren't playing, I should say.
Right.
And
or even on the team anymore.
Yeah, there's just a ton of that going around. And so it bloats those numbers out. When you actually look at what is on the field, yeah, they spend more money, but it's not as ridiculous as you'd think. You should have a pretty comparable 9, unless you're just freshly coming out of a rebuild and you've got all kids pre-arb. That's when you should be at your lowest, and then you could be higher than that. Some teams would never allow their team to get like that. Let's talk about that construction, Jim, because you were reading an interesting article. I've got a cool graphic I'll bring up here from that article to kind of help us talk about it. But San Diego is a good example of they built their team a certain way, and they never have that low payroll because they rarely bring kids up. Jackson Merrill is a weird one, actually. That's how good they thought he was. He's one of the few they didn't trade away.
Right.
So here's the graphic, right? And it's basically, they put this out on MLB.com every year. It's how they were built. They tell you about the free agency, the trades, Rule 5s, waivers, draft, international, and NDFA for all of their teams that got into the playoffs. So, Jim, this was really your baby of a subject. What do you want to touch on first?
Well, I mean, you do see, and they show you where the war comes from, right? With these teams, free agency, trades, Rule 5s, draft, international, however you built that team. Excuse me. And thing that sticks out to me that did initially is you have quite a bit of difference across the board, but you gotta respect the hell out of a team like the Astros, right? Because not only will they spend some money when they need to, they had, I think it was 31 WAR from free agents or from homegrown and draft.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot, man.
Out of their whole team. Like they draft well, they develop well, and then they will spend money to retain them or grab a free agent here or there. They're really good at what they do.
And they
Who else?
probably just ended their dynasty this year too. They are falling apart.
Right.
So, because you can only keep the wheels on so long, and they do spend, but like there's certain guys that, you ask me, they probably messed up when they decided to extend Altuve. That was probably one of those ones they should have let go. Like they're going to let Bregman go, and they let Carrera go. But we'll see what happens with them.
Yeah.
They always seem
Any
to kind of replenish, and that's a weak division. So
right.
who knows? They
And
could wind up getting it again.
sure.
The
And you've
Orioles are
got
an
other
interesting one. Orioles have
Yeah,
been.
go ahead.
We all picture that farm system and freak out about it, right? So they've got, let's see, 24.5 WAR from the draft. Nothing international. So I don't know if they've got the Pirates system internationally or what, but most of them were trades, 12 trades, 4 waivers, and 1 Rule 5. So, I mean, the Orioles are an interesting case too, Jim. They've built the way I think a lot of people here are envious of, right? A lot of people wish that we had built like the Orioles. Well, the Orioles have, if you ask me, the exact opposite problem the Pirates have. The Pirates have the pitching. Pirates don't have the hitting. Orioles have the hitting. Orioles don't have the pitching. You know, and they have a brand new owner. I don't think they know 100% what he's going to do yet. Is he going to spend more than Peter Angelos? Maybe. I mean, he said he would, but we'll see. I mean, like, Corbin Burns is going to be a free agent. Anthony Santander is going to be a free agent. You know, those guys are going to get paid. He'd be wise to keep one or both, right? That whole thing could fall off the tracks too, because the Yankees aren't exactly getting worse.
Yeah, and speaking of the Yankees, if you look at how they did it, they've actually got some pretty good WAR out of their system and internationally. The draft, international, they've done pretty well. Like, yes, free agents has been a part of it, but they've actually used their system. And you've got the Dodgers, on the other hand, for all the time we heard about, well, their system. Well, now 25 WAR out of free agency. Like, they are spending to get that kind of bang for their buck now.
I mean, how much of that's Shohei though? Like 12? Like...
Probably, but hey, you know, it's funny though. They have as much WAR out of their free agents as the Pirates did for a team.
Yeah.
This year.
Yeah. I would also say this is intentional by the Dodgers though. This is cyclical because they've also, got 12 players from trades. They're making these trades. They're trading a lot of their top prospects for things they need. And I know them well enough to know they're holding back their best ones, so I'm sure we'll see some of them start to make their way up to the team. But I can understand them not looking like they're internally built, but I would think over the years, as they allow some of those to continue to trickle up and their rotation especially gets affected by it, it'll change dramatically. Josh says Shohei technically only counts for $2 million on that, right? I think Teoscar is a big part of that. I don't know, Josh. It depends on whether you're talking about how they hit the cap or how they hit just the actual number. Like if it hits the cap, I think he counts for like 20, 30 some million or something, but not for the cap. It's stupid how it works. It doesn't matter. The point is, they're playing games with the books. That's something else they should look at when the CBA comes up. But as far as interesting teams being built here, the Phillies are another one. Very little homegrown, very little draft, very little international, a lot of free agents, a lot of trades. And I wouldn't say they ever really had like a super rich farm, but they definitely made some good trades, throughout the years. Even some little throwaway trades ended up being pretty good for them.
it's funny you say that because like every year you hear about farm systems. Does Philly ever really come into the conversation? I, it doesn't ring a bell with me.
No. Ethan has an answer here. Otani's LRD is 20s. His CBT is 40s. And Josh Brown nosed him and said thank you. So there you go. But even so, man, it's crazy how that works. And the Phillies, we don't think about how they were built because it kind of feels like they've just been good for a while. And it also always felt kind of like they just threw pieces together and it had happened to work. Like their starting rotation ended up being really, really good this whole year, but nobody thought it was going to be that good. They got some pretty good contributions from people they weren't expecting to get it from. And that's also a lot of the story of what fell apart for them. A lot of those guys stopped contributing when they got to the second half. Some of them turned out to be Jeff Locke, as opposed to
right. And here's the other thing too is like if you look across and you look at all these the wars, and all these teams are pretty much sitting in the 40s, mid 40s, maybe even the Yankees got 50, Phillies got 50.1. But what does start to jump out at me is like even when the Brewers, the Tigers, the Indians, even them as good as they were this year, all those teams had to do it a little bit differently with wars in the 30s.
right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like even then it does show up. It does start to show up. You just don't have the firepower that you tend to see out of some of these teams. You can get there, but do you have those horses?
And the ones that you think do, like the Braves, we've always talked about how they did so great. Homegrown, they've only got 4. 2 draft and 2 international. Now, they're talking about their postseason rosters too, right? Because I think Acuna should be on there in a normal year when he's not injured, right? We have to take into account that injuries kind of take some guys off too. So, but free agents 11 and trades 11. So the Braves have done a lot of work. They just have locked up their entire team. So if you think about from a Braves perspective what this playoffs have been, it's probably frightening because we talk about going into 2025 with the Pirates having most of their roster returning after the season they had. Well, the Braves are having most of their roster return too, except they've got a pitcher that's probably going to retire and another one that just had his first fully healthy season and who knows how the hell long. So how can you depend on him to do it again next year? And Acuna has just had a second straight season-ending, injury. They have and Albies has missed a significant chunk of another season. They're probably having a little bit of at least worry about some of the extensions they've made. Harris looked human this year,
Well, it's interesting because I don't know if you saw this afternoon, the Braves let their hitting coach go, their assistant hitting coach, and their catching coach today. So, yeah, and you would think there would be some understanding there where like, man, they dealt with injuries all year. But what the story is there, obviously we don't know, but certainly they're not accepting that as an excuse either. So
no, I mean, and again though, when you can't change your roster, what do you have to change? It's another reason why we wanted Derek Shelton fired, because you really kind of can't change a lot of this roster. They are hamstrung. There are kids you have to get more looks at. Otherwise, this entire exercise was something you shouldn't have done. If you're not going to give these kids a chance, you never should have been engaged in this entire thing, which many of you probably feel they never should have. I get. Point is, they did. Now you got to let them try.
So we've sat here and we've talked about some of this and how they were built. Anybody that you sit down this year that you've been rooting for, just out of curiosity? Does anybody
Yeah,
you like even subconsciously you didn't mean to, but like you find yourself pulling for them as you're watching a game?
I find a lot of players on San Diego unlikable, but I respect the hell out of the owner that passed, and I would love to see them get this for him, the year after he passed. He deserves it. He's one of the good ones. If you talk about ownership, he spent his own money. Like he made that very clear and did things that I guarantee their new ownership is not comfortable with. So
I
you'll
agree.
see the Padres probably start to fade back into the payroll world a little bit. I'm not saying they'll fall off the table, but I don't think they're going to be up there in the luxury tax area for all that much longer. So I want them to get it. I want him to be rewarded, posthumously. That's probably my biggest one. Aside from that, Detroit's sure a cool story.
It's fun to see. It's kind of fun to see them kind of mess some things up a little bit.
But I'll say Cleveland because Jim, if Cleveland gets into a World Series, I'm going.
Yeah, it would be within proximity. Ben will beg you to take him, by the way. He wants to go to every sporting event, no matter where it's at. He was wanting to go to Arlington for the MLB All-Star game. I'm like, buddy, come on now.
What was your biggest surprise from the playoffs so far? I mean, are you surprised that the Orioles got bounced so quick? It felt like it was coming to me.
Yeah, it did. The longer
I thought they got lucky
on.
to draw the Royals, but they didn't. They just didn't have it for anybody, I don't think.
I think like what stands out to me so far in this postseason is like you get back to like you've really got to have some impact guys, right? Like guys that can just land a blow when you need it. And like most players aren't built like that. But that's why you see like the Lindors of the world doing it, or even the Pete Alonsos of the world, or the Sotos, Tatis, like these big impact guys that can deliver and land like a knockout blow when you need it.
I mean, I would feel like Baltimore has a couple guys like that. Like Santander hit 40 home runs this year? I mean, Gunnar Henderson's crazy good, I just don't think they have enough. I think they had so many top prospects that everyone from afar and there to a degree probably talked themselves into believing that was going to be enough, and I had an interesting conversation at spring training this year because, we play Baltimore like every freaking day down there.
Right.
It feels like. But I was sitting in the stands. I was talking to a guy from Baltimore. We're getting ready to watch that debut game with Paul Skeens.
Oh, yeah.
So, we were there rather early for the first game. We're talking a little bit. Guy says, yeah, I don't think we got it this year. And I'm like, are you kidding, man? They're a great team. He goes, no, they got holes all over the place. And he starts yelling at like, oh, they gotta get this taken care of and that taken care of. And I gotta tell you, Adley's gonna have a comeuppance this year. And he just went off. Everything he said came true this year. Everything. Like, I thought he was an idiot in spring training. I'm sitting here right now and I'm going like, damn, that Dan dude, man, if I run into him, I'm gonna ask him for some betting advice. I mean, he knew everything that was going to happen. All the deficiencies. And I was like, wow. I mean, I thought, man, they got Corbin Burns. That's going to be what pushes them over the edge. Nope.
Right. It's funny because the Orioles, both the Orioles and the Phillies, as the season went on, I was actually shocked with the Phillies that I saw like in their last 70-ish games, they were a couple games under 500.
Yeah, they had a bad second half. They really did. They had an incredible first half.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe the adage does still hold true in baseball, even with all its randomness, is that if you're not playing good baseball down the stretch, just like in any other sport, it's really hard to just turn that on magically. It's probably not going to happen.
What about the Brewers, though? Okay, they're consistently winning divisions, but they're winning the NL Central, and the NL Central hasn't been good for a few years, right? Listen, the same argument could be made for the AL Central, for real. I could make an argument that there's 3 teams in this playoff specifically because the White Sox suck so bad. So, I don't want to like necessarily disparage the NL Central in that way. They've won the division, good for them. But they don't have a playoff roster. And it was painfully obvious they didn't. The Pirates literally hung with them in almost every game this year. In fact, when we played the other teams in the division, I felt like we had a better chance to beat the Brewers than anybody else, including the Reds sometimes.
Yeah, well, will I go that far? I don't know, but I will say I thought we had just as good of a chance with them. Like they didn't seem to be all that special.
Right.
And in fact, they really weren't. But credit to them. I mean, it's a weaker division, and they handled teams in their division pretty well. Maybe that was just enough of a difference.
The Yankees are leading their series 2-1 over the Royals. I guess that'll get settled tonight, maybe. Right?
Yes, I think it is tonight. So, yes, when this goes to podcast world,
it could be over.
Yeah,
but the Yankees are kind of that juggernaut that's left out there with LA and the Mets. It's hard to consider the Mets that because, again, they are so much about the dead money, not necessarily what's on the field. Like, in a way, they kind of have a young and exciting team, but in another way, they really don't. So, like, it's very hard to like classify the Mets. I guess it's really fun for New York, and if it made Yankees fans sad, I guess I would be okay with it. But I
don't hate the Mets.
I
don't hate them this year. Those players, like, I kind of respect Lindor. He's kind of turned my attention a little bit. Alonso's had some really big home runs. I don't hate them like I normally do this year.
Well, to me, I'm not going to get talked out of my irrational hate for them. Let's take another quick break. Let's come back. Let's talk a little bit about market size, and then let's make some silly predictions since we're talking playoffs, right?
Cool.
At DK Pittsburgh Sports, we take pride in coverage that connects our city's fans to their favorite teams. Now, that connection's stronger than ever. Introducing our all-new state-of-the-art app. Find expert inside reporting and original podcasts. Check live box scores. Track the latest stats. Chat it up with our community of thousands of fans, all in one place. The new app from DK Pittsburgh Sports. Coverage that connects.
All right, welcome back to the Pirates Fan Forum here on DK Pittsburgh Sports, home of your small market Pittsburgh Pirates. Oh, don't say it. Don't say small market. It gives people an excuse to suck. Listen, let's define what a small market is, Jim, because let's be honest about what makes a small market in baseball.
All right.
It doesn't have to be city size. It doesn't have to be population. It really can be a factor of a whole bunch of things. It can be the willingness of an ownership group. It can be the stupidity of an ownership group, the inability to invest around themselves and bring in revenue outside of baseball that props up your team's payroll. It can be being too stupid to negotiate a good TV deal. Back in the day when you were allowed to negotiate TV deals.
Right.
It can be negotiating a terrible percentage of your concessions or zero.
Or parking.
It can be owning zero parking anywhere around your stadium outside of where the players park, like an idiot would do. Can't imagine anyone would be that stupid. Not own any
No.
parking. How
I
could you
couldn't.
not own any parking? That would be so dumb. You would almost get drummed out of your job, right?
I can't think of an example for sure. Not close either.
And you also have some small cities that are very comparable to Pittsburgh, like St. Louis.
St. Louis comes to mind.
But the Cardinals are the only show in town. There's nobody around them except for the Royals, and the Royals suck 9 times out of 9. You know, they're in the playoffs once here. It's been 10 years. You know, like it's not like they make it all the time. And again, I will not guarantee they'll make it next year. They do have a nice pitching staff, but they're going to have to add again, and a lot of those pitchers are leaving.
Yeah. They're a team I could get on board with. But I know that's not our topic here, but I like Bobby Witt. I think.
Yeah, but you take Lugo and Waka off that team, and they are not where they are.
Yeah.
So that's not a division that's just going to sit there either. So we'll see what happens.
He's a hell of a player, though.
He is, and they were smart to lock him up. I mean, that's kind of what I hope the Pirates would do with Paul Skeens. You know, you get a guy like that, you can't let him go. It's just that's game over. That's Barry Bonds. That's whoever leaving. You can't let it happen. You have to hold on to them. I don't know though. When you define that market size, though, I hear that all the time. Like Milwaukee. Milwaukee's market size is comparable. It's actually a little bit smaller. Their owner, he's a partner with the city. Like they needed renovations. There was rumors that popped up that they might be looking to potentially move when their lease was up in Milwaukee. I think that rumor was out there for about a week before he put the kibosh on it, signed a deal with the city, and fronted $170 million of the team's money towards whatever renovations he wanted to make to the stadium as well, and promised to stay there through 2050. And he puts a winning product on the field all the time. And that's why they sell out. And that's why he's able to do it. But he had to invest first. So all small market teams are not created equal, Jim. They don't have to be like that. I don't need it to be right or wrong that Bob doesn't spend money for me to say that he spends money like a small market team. Right?
Yeah.
I don't have to care how much money the A's owner has. He spends money like a small market team. Seattle spends money like they don't have it. Minneapolis spends money like they don't have it. There's a lot of the Chicago White Sox in the third largest major media market there is in the country. Just set the loss record. You know, small markets are not created equal in baseball.
No, they're not. I don't know if you saw where the Twins are exploring a sale, that ownership group now.
Saw that, yeah.
So, you know, do I think that has anything to do with what could happen in Pittsburgh? No. But I do think there are some owners around the league that look at this and think these valuations of these teams are so high. If there's ever a time where you thought about getting out, you could do it now. I think that's what Minnesota is doing. I think that family is that's why they're exploring it. I wish Bob would do that. But, you know,
I think there's two schools of thought here. The CBA is going to expire after 2026, which for a long time you and I have looked at that date and known it's probably going to be right in the middle of the Pirates being decent. But this game itself is barreling towards an all-out war. And I don't mean like which teams had the best players. I mean like absolute bloodbath of war. And it's going to be a 3-sided affair. There's going to be the players, there's going to be the big spender teams and the low spender teams. And they've all got this new TV bugaboo thrown in there. And for the first time ever, all these owners are going to have to absorb paying minor league players a lot more than they have been. That's going to change an awful lot because that money's not going to come out of the bottom lines. Trust me. You know what I mean? They're going to want
Sure.
extra revenue sharing for that. They're talking about increasing the Central Baseball Fund so that they can start distributing payroll out to teams from that instead of like asking them to sign players. They already started doing that with some of the bonuses, like Paul Skeen's bonus. Like if he, finishes third in the Cy Young, I think I saw Ethan put it out. It was like 100,000 or 150,000 or something like that, or a million, whatever. It's not important the figure, but it's not important to him either. I mean, like he'll be fine either way. But he only gets one of them, but it comes from the central fund, so that's not necessarily like the same thing as like, oh, the Pirates are out this now. There's a lot of weird things they've tried to do in this game. It's all going to come to a head right then. It's really difficult to think about what some of these teams are going to do. Like, would you sell now? Or do you think maybe you'd wait for this CBA because there's a good chance that revenue sharing is going to go up? For the smaller market teams because of the TV having to be split and MLB taking over. I think it's 70% of markets now, potentially for streaming. There's going to be a whole new revenue stream coming into this game at some point. I have a feeling that a lot of these valuations are going to explode. So I think I'd probably wait if I were an owner that was thinking about it. But maybe the Twins don't think they can survive that lockout.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there are certain owners that are just thinking, I'm going to get out when I know it's good, because I don't know how ugly it's going to get. And the other thing is I was just reading the other day, and man, I wish I could remember where I read it. They're already talking about like you could see another year of free agency where teams aren't wanting to spend. They don't want to commit right now.
They're at least not wanting to give out the long-term deals
right.
to free agents, right?
I mean, we already saw that last year.
It feels that way. And there's been a general bucking against there was a bucking against Scott Boras and his clients and the way that they went about signing with people. Jordan Montgomery fired him because he didn't like the handling of his free agency this offseason. And he performed like garbage. So I'm surprised Scott was probably like, thank you. Now I don't have to rep you next year. Like,
right.
Because that's going to be a low pay for me. But there also seem to be some teams that are more like, so I get this guy, but I don't have to necessarily commit for, okay. There seem to be some teams that are happy with that. I don't know that that's how I'd want to build a team where you have to think about every year whether this guy's going to be there or that guy's going to be there. That's difficult.
It is. Josh brings up a good point too. Like, but that was part of how Boras handled it too, which, Josh is saying, imagine if Jordan Montgomery had a full season, it's possible he stunk because of that. Well, they were trying to hold out for as much money as possible, and that affected that. So, yeah, I look at it like here's where you're going to start seeing it creep up even this offseason and all next year is the psychological warfare is going to start. The
leaked plans,
yes,
the leaked proposals,
yes,
I already saw other
source of this says
I already
this,
saw
the
soft
posturing,
soft salary floor and more restrictive luxury tax with a lower cap. I already saw they were going to institute something like that or try to. I already saw they were talking about going hard after the international draft. And I know that the low revenue teams are going to go after a much expanded revenue sharing. So, and I think the bigger market teams, they're getting tired of giving revenue sharing and then having these teams continue to say they can't afford players. I I think it's at some point that's all going to come to a head. Will it be this time? I don't know. It's Manfred's last one. What incentive does he have to not mess it up?
Right, and it's just you're going to start seeing the posturing start happening really soon here. Like the framework, the ground, the legwork for the battle that's coming. We're going to start hearing about that.
Well, the garbagey thing about it is like this is where markets really do matter, or your owner really matters at least. This is a market where, like, if the team is going to make $15 million less because they have to pay minor league players more money, they will spend $15 million less somewhere else. That's this team. I mean, that is what this owner does. They're not alone. They're not. There's a lot of teams like that, unfortunately. And I think back to what we talked about at the beginning, Jim, this playoff structure, well, it kind of incentivizes thinking like that, doesn't it? Because why would I try to keep pace with people I can't keep pace with if I can just jump in like on the last stretch of the race and pretend I ran it? Maybe splash some water in my face and my pits and say, man, that was a rough run. And I can get away with it. I think you'll find a lot of people who get away with it.
Well, you've got a lot of owners in baseball that I think do look at it that way, Gary. I think they look at it and think, you know what? We're gonna try to do this as fiscally responsible as we can and as financially advantageous as we can. Hope that it works out. If it doesn't, that's fine. We'll start over. We'll try it again. And I think that that's an issue, right? Like,
yeah,
the baseball fosters complacency, and I think that that's the biggest thing. Is like it goes far beyond the Pirates. There's probably half the teams in the league that are looking at every year thinking, why try to spend $180 million? I would think the players would be worried about that. Players should be worried about that.
Worried about that. I would think the league should be a little bit worried about deferments and things like that. I think LA probably triggered something there that I think a lot of people are going to make an issue now. That's something that I don't think you can continue to see happen. That's not fair.
No, it's not.
You have to have a certain amount of financial backing to be able to do something like that. That's what I mean. That's not just a choice. That's not just my owner's too cheap to do something like that.
Yeah,
there are not teams that could do that. The Yankees could not do that.
Absolutely. I guess overall, baseball tends to incentivize maybe not competing fully. And that's a strange setup for a sport.
Yeah, it's something, man. Next week, we're going to get back into Pirates baseball. We're going to talk about this roster. We're going to start talking about things we would do to this roster. We're going to stop worrying about who's doing it because we're going to do it, right?
We're going to be in charge.
This is the year we're not supposed to have handcuffs on because we're trying to win now. Right, Jim?
Hey,
we're going to coach every game to win now, right?
We're not just having fun anymore, Gary. It's all
right, man.
It's all business.
Right. So we'll do a little bit of that.
Yeah. Before we get out of here, let's just talk about how you see this totally random postseason playing out. Any predictions out of you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Yankees are going to ultimately win their series, and I think they'll win the next series too. I think the Yankees are going to go to the World Series. Detroit's a really cool story. I think Cleveland's going to ultimately take them out, and it'll be Cleveland and New York again, which makes for a really good series. I think usually they're very different teams. They play each other hard. It's fun. I think Jose Ramirez shines in this series too. He really does. And you know what? I'm going to go with my original pick of San Diego. I think San Diego deserves it this year. Let's say I think the baseball gods are on their side.
Well, they're going to have to slay the dragon to do it. So,
The dragon looks like he's out of smoke.
out of pitching, that's for sure. Starting pitching.
You know what? You know what the Dodgers look like to me? Old. And I don't think they can keep up. I don't think they can get through this slog. I really don't. It's also been, for some of their better players, a very emotionally taxing season. Like, I don't know how the hell Freddie Freeman's playing baseball right now with what he went through this year. And like, and Mookie Betts has moved all over the field doing whatever they needed him to do, whenever they needed him to do it. You know, over the last few years, the Dodgers have let a few players get away that I bet they wish they hadn't. You know, like Trey Turner and whatnot. I think they'd be in a better spot had they held on to some of them. But Gavin Lux is the poster boy for why they aren't trying their prospects anymore. They're just trading them off for people now because.
Well, if you can trade them for known commodities and you can afford to do it, I don't know. It's not a bad strategy.
Right. Hey, if you can do it, you can do it. If you can eat dead money, you can do whatever you want. So that's it. That's the playoffs this year, Jim. We'll see what happens when the World Series comes around. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit. Next week, 8:00 again, everybody. And then Halloween special. We're going to be dressing up. I'm going to be telling spooky stories. I'll probably tell a story about the 100-year owner. But it's going to be a lot of fun, dude.
Yeah, if you've seen the Christmas special, we're going to have more fun on the Halloween special, or we're at least going to try. And if that
will, we're gonna have movie clips. We're gonna do special intros. It's gonna be a blast, and spooky stories. I'm gonna be wearing a skull mask. I think it's gonna be fun.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've made jackasses out of ourselves before. We'll do it again. I'm not
going to sing this time.
No, we won't do that to anybody. So,
but it's going to be a blast, man. I can't wait for that. We'll have fun with that, and then we'll get into the off season. We'll start digging into this team and what we're going to do. I haven't been anxious to get into the off season this year, Jim. I think in a way, I'm kind of waiting for everybody to kind of just cool their jets a little bit, let the smoke clear a little bit, and then let everybody look at this team with clear eyes again. Because I think despite all of the outside of management, the team itself, I look at it a lot. I'm more happy than I'm not. I think it's probably a pretty damn good team next year.
Well, I think what comes down to for me, and I've seen this on social media, and that's why I think tonight was a good show, which is everybody just needed a tiny bit of a break here. Like, that was a rough season. It ended rough, and everyone's been able to take a break, watch some postseason baseball, enjoy some football if you can, but it's going to be time to get back into that. So break time's over, kids.
Yeah, we've been very strategic about how we approach this off season so far. I think it's probably for the best. It's not that I don't want to have arguments about stuff. I love doing that. I just want to have arguments with people that are in a headspace where they can actually communicate. I don't think people are in that headspace right now.
They're not. And
I think I could tell you a story about the Pirates getting a new bubblegum sponsor, and it would be some conspiracy right now.
Nobody's in the right frame of mind.
I'm just not trying to have some of these deep conversations about building a team when people are just going to scream about not signing whoever the equivalent to Nolan Ryan is to you. I don't want to hear about it right now.
we'll get back to it. Let me give you my prediction. You did say, let me just get you on record here. You did say
I got Yankees and Padres in the World Series. I guess I would go Padres to win it all.
Okay. I am going to go Yankees, and Mets.
All right,
Yes,
you're going to Subway Series, huh?
Subway Series. Have you seen Aaron Judge? How much he stinks in the postseason? It's unbelievable in his career. It's
Yeah.
crazy. Mets are going. They're riding the vibes high. Mets over Yankees Subway Series.
Do you think that they have to adopt Grimace forever if they win?
Oh, they'll put a statue of Grimace outside that damn ballpark. which actually would be kind of awesome.
It would be kind of funny if they did. It'll be almost like that fat lady statue outside of Phillies Stadium for hockey. That fat lady that used to sing the national anthem. Yeah.
I guarantee you, if you put a Grimace statue out there, everybody would take pictures with it. Everybody.
We used to go to Philly and put a Lemieux jersey on her, Philly and put a Lemieux jersey on her. That was great. People in Philly don't like that.
The Rocky statue.
Yeah. All right, man. Hey, good show. Let's toss it off to our buddy Ben. And
let's go, Bucks!
Yeah, buddy. We'll say goodbye, everybody. Thanks.
See you guys.